Hello there, and welcome to the Trailblazing Technologies for 2022 and Beyond Virtual Day. My name is Matt Rayner. I'm the publisher here at Healthcare Innovation. Today's virtual event is yet another program within our digital health virtual series. And I would like to start by thanking you all for joining us here today. I am sure you've seen by now that we have a number of sessions available for you here to watch both live today and also on demand. If you are joining us here live today, we have both an opening panel discussion due to kick off here momentarily, and then a fireside chat coming up live at 12 o'clock Eastern Time. Joining those two sessions are a number of fireside chats available to you to watch at any time on demand. I encourage you all to take the time to view these sessions to learn about all the wonderful innovations healthcare leaders and solution providers are taking here in 2022. A big thank you to all of our supporting partners for today's virtual event: Juniper Networks, Health ITQ, NextThink, Caregility, Goliath Technologies, Vertica, SpecOps Software, Deliver Health Solutions, Silk, and Mimecast. I'd now love to turn our attention to today's opening panel discussion on the near-term horizon, technology advancement, and the healthcare system. If you have any questions during this opening sessions, please utilize the chat functionality within the Zoom platform. Okay, to moderate our opening panel discussion, I'd now love to welcome onto this virtual stage our editor-in-chief here at Healthcare Innovation, Mark Haglund, to officially kick things off. Mark, are you with us?
Yes, thank you so much, Matt. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Good morning to everyone in our audience. And as I like to say, good morning to the people in our future, for those who will be watching later on. It's so great to have you here. I have a wonderful panel of speakers. We are going to be talking about how patient care organization leaders are leveraging technology to make real advances in terms of clinical operations and non-clinical operations. We've got three speakers ready to speak. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have the presenters do brief 15-minute presentations, and then we will go into a discussion in which we'll talk about what everyone is doing, and then we'll have time for questions. Right now, we have Dr. Dr. Finkler, who is Chief Clinical Officer of Advent Health Central Florida Division, and he will be followed by John Donahue, who is Vice President of Information Services, Entity Services at Penn Medicine in Philadelphia. We've also invited Dr. Amy Satpathy, who's Chief Medical Information Officer for Population Health at UC San Diego Health. We're waiting to see if she'll be able to join us. So we're going to begin with a presentation by Dr. Finkler. Dr. Finkler, welcome, and I so look forward to what you have to share now.
Well, thank you, and good morning. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Mark, and good morning and welcome to our virtual audience. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really privileged to talk with you about some of the innovations that Advent Health has been utilizing, quite frankly, for the last several years, and talk specifically about some of the innovations that's come about as a result of our COVID experience. So I'm going to start with our journey in MissionControl, which is really our nerve and our central control center with regards to everything that's going on with regards to patients, patient placement, and patient activity. So I'm going to give you a little bit of history and bring you back to March of 2018. And at that time, I was the Chief Medical Officer at our quaternary facility across the street from where I sit in Orlando. And I walked in that morning and I noticed that we had a very rough flu season. The winter months were very difficult, and I was unofficially at about 135% capacity at that day. And at that point, we had about 35 patients scattered throughout the facility that were not in a bed. They were in, we got to a point where we were creating what we called hall beds. So we literally took beds out in the hall, we put curtains around them, and that's where people were getting care. I had no room left in my emergency room that day. I had 16 intubated patients in the emergency room waiting for ICU beds. And I remember going to my CEO and said, I don't have a single place to put anybody else. What would you like me to do? And he said to me, well, we need to close the hospital. I said, we need to do what? He said, we need to close the hospital. I said, what? I've never had to close a hospital. What does that mean? We talked about it. And the bottom line is that's exactly what we did. We closed all of our elective volumes down completely. We left our emergency room open for emergencies only. And we spent the better part of the next 5 days digging out of a hole. At that point, in the aftermath of that date, we were visited by ACA, the Agency for Healthcare Administration, because we had closed our facilities. And ACA was not exactly pleased with us when they came and visited us, because at that point we had about 17 patients still in hall beds. We vowed and made a pledge to ACA that we would never be in that situation again. And that really was the birth of our looking around the country to say, we've got really problems with regards to our capacity. We are set up in the South Division of the Central Florida Division of Advent Health, where it's a 7-facility division. Advent Health Orlando is the quaternary hub surrounded by 6 other facilities around Orlando, and all roads always led to Orlando. And that was really the birth of our MissionControl, which again, from a historical standpoint, started as how do we manage capacity across our 7-hospital system, knowing that someday we were going to also have to think about what about our North Division, which has another 6, and what about our West Division that has another 7 that sits in the Tampa area. So it was born out of capacity, and we were able to stand this up in August of 2019. And then, of course, the COVID came along, and quite frankly, we were able to manage a lot of our capacity by moving the appropriate people to the appropriate bed based on our ability to know exactly what was going on at the moment based on real time, thanks to our MissionControl, which, by the way, we built with help of GE. The reality is that when we built MissionControl, we had a much bigger vision than just a capacity management tool. And in fact, we started to think about what happens if we were able to feed all of this clinical information into a central repository area and start to identify things that were problematic for us. Things like, how do we expedite discharges? What are the bottlenecks to placement? And a way to identify things. And we also started thinking bigger than capacity and where are bottlenecks and how does it help us with capacity on that side. But actually, how could we utilize this technology to start improving care? And it doesn't take you long to start thinking about sepsis, for example, where you could now start looking at who is being diagnosed as sepsis, who's got missing power plans, what are elements of the power plans that are missing, who's got what issue with regards to timing of antibiotics, timing of the next blood draw, timing of the next lactate level, et cetera, et cetera. But the ultimate goal of all of MissionControl is actually to start using it in a predictive manner. So if this system is able to machine learn, it will, for example, understand next Friday, I have an average caseload of X. On a Friday morning, I'm usually getting X number of requests for transfer into a quaternary facility. So what would that look like? And what would that tell me with regards to my staffing demands? And things like that, that you could start saying, you know, from a machine learning and an AI technology, boy, wouldn't it be great if we can get predictive analytics? And certainly you could take this even a step further. If all the clinical information is now fed to the central nerve center, it will actually start to not tell me who is missing power plan or elements of a power plan that's septic, but it should start to accurately predict who comes through my doors that has the likelihood of getting septic, so that I can actually start interventions today that will prevent them from ever getting down that path. The reality is we've just finished our capacity capability, and and the issue with regards to starting to feed information so that we could use it to help us with some of the capacity as far as placement as well as discharge planning. We are in an Epic transition, so we are moving away from Cerner, and an Epic feed, once that's done in the summer in our division, we will start using that to actually do the things that we talked about, and that is to improve the care and to start looking from a predictive standpoint. Our entire company is going to go from a Cerner to an Epic platform. So this is across the US. And you can now start to see at a quaternary hub like Orlando, you could utilize things like a MissionControl to start thinking about how do you start to funnel things to a quaternary hub that only the quaternary hub can do, things like heart and lung transplants. And certainly we had lots of phone calls during the COVID days with regards to our ECMO capability. We built a 7-bed ECMO unit, which very quickly during the height of the pandemic, we were at around 22 ECMOs at a time. So again, I think this is enormous potential with regards to the central repository and a MissionControl that we believe can be expanded well beyond just the capacity that we currently use it for. So again, I'd hear anybody's comments or questions with regards to that MissionControl and utilization. But another area that we really have focused on is this area of what have we learned from COVID. Dr. Victor Herrera, who is now the Chief Medical Officer at the Quaternary Orlando campus, and I wrote an article which we published in the New England Journal of Medicine titled 5 Areas to Redefine the Clinical Leader of the Future. And what we did during the lull between Delta and Omicron is that we started to think about things that we were either asked to do, things that we had done, or things that we had learned that we thought would become permanent parts of the necessary armamentarium for the chief clinical officers or clinical leaders of the future. And we outlined 5 of them, and I think it's a very easy read. And again, it's in the New England Journal of Medicine Catalyst. And the first one that we talked about was the use of how do you apply novel forecasting methods. Before COVID, I would tell you, not ever in my days as a practicing physician or during my days as a chief medical officer, was I really ever asked to predict what tomorrow was going to be like or what next week was going to look like. And obviously during COVID, this had tremendous ramifications. So we began as chief medical officers to start looking around to say, what is going to be most predictive based on the data? We became experts with regards to predictive analytics, which quite frankly, most of us were never trained in. And we sought additional folks to actually help us understand the predictive analytics. We began to apply some of these novel forecasting methods, like our COVID positivity in our wastewater in one of our neighboring counties. And actually what we found was that the most predictive analytic that we could find, which remained the most predictive one during the entire pandemic, was our positivity rate in the community within our urgent cares, our central cares. And what we identified was that that gave us a 2-week headway with regards to what we thought was going to happen. The peak of our inpatient hospitalization occurred 14 days to the nose in each one of the waves when it peaked out in the community, and we were able to see when it dropped in the when it nadired in the central care. We would predict 14 days from there we would see a nadir in our inpatients as well. And again, that became very, very predictive with regards to how we looked at it. The other items that we talked about were action-oriented data views. I think as clinicians, we were all accustomed to see our data, but most of the data that we looked at would tell us how we were doing, but not tell us what we were doing or what to do. And so we took a very different approach with regards to our data builds. And we were very committed during the course of the early days of COVID and throughout COVID, that because none of us had ever lived through there wasn't a playbook. We were actually not going to have to not only show the data, but show people what they would need to do. Here's the remdesivir. Here's the remote patient monitoring, which I'll talk about in a minute. We also talk in this article about creating and leading external partnerships, and certainly we are not alone in that. The CMOs across the country became the voice of reason and sanity for your local officials, both at the county level, the city level, and the state level. Our schools look to us on a frequent basis. Our local sports teams, we live in the world of Walt Disney World. They came to us with regards to what do we do? How do we open? When we open, how do we do it safely? When is it time to start scaling back some of the things? And obviously the media was really front and center, and almost all of our CMOs had to become adept at dealing with the media. The last two things that we talk about with regards to that CMO of the future and what do you really need to do, it's this whole concept of transforming care while accounting for our workforce instability. I don't think it's a unknown fact to everybody on this call that our workforce remains major issues. And as we start to move and change what we do, we've really got to think about what's the impact on our workforce. So for example, during the early days of COVID, as we were struggling with our workforce and being inundated with patients, we said, what happens if we actually start to monitor patients at home? If they met certain criteria, we would give them all the tools that they would need. We would make sure that they were hooked up in an electronic fashion so we could actually monitor people and actually understand and get people who are running into trouble back when they needed it. And what we found in this remote patient monitoring, which we initially did with a company called Vivify, was that we were able to dramatically decrease the hospitalization and really, quite frankly, save a lot of the workforce with regards to the need for hospitalization and what we would need to provide. Based on that experience, we are now taking this whole concept and starting to look at treating other conditions at home when possible, and extending beyond just a remote patient monitoring, but actually start to think about what does a hospital at home or care at home look like for things like CHF and COPD and all the technologies that you need to utilize. And we're doing this.
I believe that we've lost Dr. Finkler, and we hope to get him back. So I think what we will do right now, because we've lost Dr. Finkler, we will have him come back and finish his last few minutes when he's able to return to us. But I'm able to welcome Dr. Amy Satpathy. Dr. Satpathy, are you with us?
Yes, indeed. It's great to be with you today. Thank you.
Thank you. We seem to have been having a few technical glitches, and for that we apologize. This is life on Zoom. So what we're going to do, I think, Dr. Satpathy, I'll have you do your presentation, and then I'm sure we'll be able to get Dr. Finkler back, and we'll have him finish his last comments after you've presented. So welcome. Please introduce yourself to our audience, and please go ahead and do your presentation. And when you've concluded, we'll have Dr. Finkler finish his.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for having me here today. It's always a delight to be with all of you and hear about the leading innovations that help to deliver great care for our communities and our nation. I'm Amy Satpathy. I'm a primary care physician, and I'm also a Chief Medical Information Officer of Population Health at UC San Diego Health. I serve as the Division Chief for General Internal Medicine and also a quality leader over a number of our quality programs around population health. So I was invited to come and talk to you about what's cool and novel in current state And I have to say, I feel like I'm going to tell you something that you already know. Many times we see that new technologies come into being, and yet we kind of wait just a little bit to see what's going to happen. And I think the main area that we're seeing this is around patients, whether it's patient-reported outcomes, whether it's patients' digital monitoring. Many of our patients now, for nearly a decade, have had a number of devices at home. They wear watches to see whether they are getting their steps in. They now have watches that watch their EKGs. And how have we incorporated digital health into our strategy as healthcare providers? I think there's some work to do there. And so what I would like to encourage you is to think a little bit about how you might take these shelf-ready materials and bring them into your digital strategy. Ed Finkler, whom you just heard, talked a lot about how to be a thought leader and think about workforce, predictive analytics, but digital health was part of that strategy. And as our patients have had for many years, lots of challenges in getting to our healthcare centers. So sometimes they're at home and they have readings at home, but they may not be able to come into our practice to sort of get that assurance. But sometimes also they have between clinic measurements or between hospital measurements, and they're at home with these digital devices, but who's watching? And so today I'd like to ask you, are you ready to have digital health be part of your strategy in healthcare? Are you ready to take these digital devices, such as a blood pressure cuff, blood glucose monitoring, weight, and other innovative devices, and integrate them actually into your workflows? And this requires some thought. As a primary care doc, I can tell you, yesterday I came back from President's Day, and I walked into my in-basket and I had about 60 messages, and I don't even work full time. So there was a lot of work to do. And the last thing I wanted was really to have an inbox with about, 5,000 digital readings to go over as well. So I think as we think about this sort of shelf-ready solution, we have to be strategic in how we get the right information to the right person. So I think part of this is first, do we have the right equipment? So Mrs. Smith, who's at home, does she have a blood pressure cuff? And does she know how to use it? So part of the setup of this strategy, meaning sort of having what has been in the market, technical people who can interface, talk to Mrs. Smith, get her set up, check what she's able to do. Sometimes Mrs. Smith is able to have a digital device. She may have a smartphone, she may have Wi-Fi, but she also might have nothing. She might have be part of the digital divide and simply prefer to have just a plain cuff that has no access to any sort of digital interface. So you really have to think through what that looks like. In our optimal digital health, Mrs. Smith has a blood pressure cuff. She's enabled to set this device up with a third-party app on her smartphone. This integrates through an app that then pushes the data into the electronic health record where it is aggregated. This aggregated data flows into a database that has a dashboard that sits on top for someone. And if you think about it, think about Susie, who's the registered nurse who used to sit in the telemetry support box, is now having a digital health box, and she's looking at this dashboard and noticing that 5 patients have critical blood pressure readings, and what will she do about it? So again, someone sitting on a large dashboard, having a sense what's going on day to day, and then having the team built out. Now, this took us probably 6 months to come to agreement in all the different workflows that were everything from what are those critical values, how fast do we need to respond, what are the key questions that we ask our patients, And then how do we intervene, whether that's directing the patient to repeat the blood pressure, whether it's directing them to take an additional blood pressure medication, or have real-time support from a pharmacist who can help liaison with the primary care doc. So just last week on Friday, I had a message from the pharmacist. My patient's systolic blood pressures were running about 165. Would I like to double up on the ARB? Would I like to add a thiazide? How do I want to perform that med management? And without me, having to get on the phone, call back and forth, try to get a hold of the patient, I got within an hour a note from the pharmacist. It's all been taken care of. The medication's been called in and the patient understands what to do. What a fantastic future in thinking. And as Ed was talking about, Ed Finkler, being a thought leader and the workforce challenges, part of it is conservation of the workforce and making sure the right roles and people are ready to take care of our patients and help them where they are. So when you think about this digital future that you're helping to design at your organization, I hope you think about every hypertensive being offered the opportunity to have digital health platform for integrated BP reading, every diabetic having integration of their blood glucose, obesity also for keeping track of weight, but also steps and decisions that they can do in terms of their health. So today I can tell you we're just early. I feel like we're in baby steps of this journey. We have about 1,116 patients who are part of our hypertensive active patients, integrated BP readings. We only have 62 individuals who have signed up for our integrated digital glucose monitoring, but we have more than 1,500 individuals who've gone through digital health text coaching and an active panel of 630 patients who are in our digital text coaching programs today. So Mark, did you have any other questions for me?
I didn't right now, Doctor, but what we'll do is I'll definitely have questions to you a little bit later. So fortunately, thank you so much. And thank you for hopping in. I thought that we got Dr. Finkler back, but I believe that we lost him again. So what we'll do is we'll go to John Donahue at Penn Medicine, and then let's hope we get Dr. Finkler back later on, but I appreciate that he gave about 90% of his presentation before the Zoom devil caught him. So John Donahue, thank you again, Dr. Satpathy. And John Donahue, welcome. And please tell us everything that's going on at Penn Medicine.
Sure. Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to follow Amy and Neil and some great takeaways from their presentations. So I come to you today from cloudy Philadelphia, working for an organization called Penn Medicine. We're a large academic healthcare system in southeastern Pennsylvania. Just a little sense of scale, we've got about 40,000 employees and close to $9 billion in annual revenues. So what I'd like to talk to you today about is a project that we did. It's a little bit more brick and mortar than what you've been hearing about, but it really allowed us to begin to talk about technologies and advanced technologies and use a greenfield approach for these technologies. So I'm going to talk to you about something we call the HUP Pavilion. HUP is the Hospital of the University of Pennsylvania, which is our sort of keystone hospital in University City of Philadelphia. So we started on this project, and we really started to challenge ourselves. What are the things that we want to look to do from a design perspective, and what are the things that are awfully important for us? So the first was connected campus. How do we create a campus in an urban setting with older buildings? And there were two parts of this. One was connecting it virtually through technologies, which was sort of an IT objective. But we also connected it physically with bridges and tunnels such that you can get off a train station on part of our campus, walk through our new building, walk through our old buildings, walk into the Penn campus, which is beautiful, without ever sort of leaving the area. So connected campus was key for us. Secondly, we've always been known for delivering world-class patient care, but we knew that we needed to continue to transform the delivery of care to keep pace and stay ahead of the game. So this campus, this particular pavilion that we were building, gave us an opportunity to really challenge ourselves around transforming the delivery of care. Next, every decision we made in this pavilion was around the patient. We really took a patient-centered approach, and as you start to see the design of the building, the design of the patient rooms, everything was really thought out around making it convenient and comfortable for the patient. We wanted to design for collaboration. So collaboration can be a doctor to patient, a care team to patient family, a doctor to a researcher on our campus. We wanted to be able to facilitate collaboration in this facility. We also wanted to leverage leading edge technologies. It really gave us an opportunity to begin to pilot some new technologies, roll some new technologies in that we couldn't necessarily use at some of our legacy buildings. It also allowed us to create a hub for innovation. So as you can imagine, a lot of awfully smart people on campus between the university, the hospitals, the School of Medicine. So we wanted to be able to facilitate innovation, and we've designed that into this particular building. We wanted our building to be environmentally or climate friendly. So when we opened, we are the only hospital, I think, today in the United States that's over 1 million square feet that has LEED's Gold certification. So we were successful in doing that. We drove down our operating costs by about 14% by taking this climate-friendly approach to the building. We wanted it to be a hospitality approach. So we know that as patients come to Penn, that it's certainly an uncomfortable situation. We wanted to make it feel more like a hotel stay. So we really focused a lot of our work around hospitality and making sure that while our patients were with us, they felt as comfortable as possible. And then lastly, we wanted the building to be as flexible and as scalable as possible. We firmly believe this building will be there in 100 years providing world-class patient care, and we wanted to be able to make it and build it in a way that we could continue to develop for newer technologies and newer capabilities as they became available. So that's a picture of the pavilion on the upper right. I'll run you through a quick timeline just to give you a sense of the project itself. We started to talk in the late 2008, early 2009 timeframe about the need to build a new facility. So there was a lot of concepts at that time period. We took this to the board of directors 10 years ago and got approval to proceed. It's the largest capital project in the history of Penn Medicine. And Penn Medicine's been around now for over 250 years. We like to say that we've got the first hospital in the United States with Pennsylvania Hospital in the 1750s, first school of medicine. So the largest project in our history, and certainly at that scale, is probably going to be the largest project going into the near-term future anyway. We used what's called an integrated project delivery approach. I won't spend a ton of time on this, but in normal construction cases, you hire a GC and they hire the subs. We took a slightly different approach where we had all the disciplines at the table with skin in the game. And it really helped us make better decisions. It eliminated some of the competition, eliminated some of the issues that you run into when you're building a facility like this. With everybody rowing in the right direction, it allowed us to do some pretty spectacular work. And we're going to continue using that IPD approach as we move forward with construction projects. We stole a page from Disney. If you've had a chance to be at the Disney parks with your family, you're focusing on the attractions. You don't often see them removing trash. You don't see them delivering supplies. And we tried to take the same approach. So at the core of our building are all those services, out of the eyes of the patients, their families, and their visitors. So all the linen deliveries, the trash chutes, all that stuff happens off stage. And the patients are really treated to the external parts of the building, the natural light, the beautiful views of the city. So it was something that we, adopted early on, and I think it was very effective for us. We kicked off the project in 2014, and I was shocked as we opened the building, the number of people that were still on this project 7 years later. We had to demo an existing hotel that was on that footprint before we could build this facility. And while normally that would seem like a pretty straightforward process, for us, this particular hotel butted up against the Penn Museum, which had mummies and all kinds of sensitive artifacts. So we couldn't use typical implosion techniques. We certainly didn't want to kick debris and dirty air up that would potentially be pulled into the intakes of our legacy hospital across the street. So it was a very careful demolition. One of the most interesting things that I saw, and was a brainchild of our CEO, was, we had rented out a warehouse in Philadelphia, and we built out 1/2 floor. So if you look at the building, there are mirror sides, about 45,000 square feet in styrofoam, in the way that we were going to design the patient rooms and design the hallways. And then we brought hundreds of people in, doctors, nurses, clinicians, administrators, and had them push gurneys through and had them do things. We did time and motion studies with elevators. We got hundreds of suggestions about what we could do differently. We tore the styrofoam down and we rebuilt it with all these suggestions built in. So it really gave us a leg up, an advantage as we began to do the actual construction. It's the largest concrete pour in the history of Philly, which is interesting to me, particularly with Comcast having a couple of their headquarter towers. There's some other large development projects in the region. In the early days of the pandemic, we thought we would need some overflow. We were about 2 years away from opening, and we actually were far enough along with some of the units to actually roll beds in and roll some of the medical technology in. As it turns out, we didn't need to use it, but it was a great opportunity for us to really figure out how close we were to being ready and some of the things that would happen as we did start to move in. We opened the building 7 a.m. October 30th, so about 4 months ago. That morning, we took 350 acute care patients from across the street. We moved them in an incredibly organized manner with teams around each patient. Every 5 minutes, a new patient moved across. It was an unbelievable production that worked very well. Fast forward to February of 2022, and the building is at capacity. So we've actually filled it up fairly quickly. So if we look quickly at some of the IT technology that went into a building of this scale, like us, most facilities have a distributed backbone, if you will, places where you have geographically diverse technologies, load balancers, firewalls, distribution switches. This greenfield building gave us an approach and ability to build out a new technology center in the building and retire one that was older and in the basement of a hospital where it had some risks. We built out 50 new communication closets, and if anyone's ever kind of negotiated with clinical space to try to build out technology space, it's a challenge. We stole a page from our CEO, and we actually built out a closet with styrofoam ourselves and showed what we needed space-wise, and we were successful in getting that. All the closets have card key access. All the closets have our technology behind electronically closed gates so that people that come in, vendors to supply and maintain nurse call, don't have access to our technology. So a real eye towards space, environmentals, and security with our closets. 14 plus miles of fiber optic cabling, 1,500 miles of copper cabling, 3,100 network ports, almost 900 access points for Wi-Fi across the facility. So a huge network footprint, big infrastructure footprint. Almost 3,300 computer devices, over 20,000 medical devices. Again, a significant footprint for us. 504 patient rooms, and each and every one of those patient rooms has 30 computerized sensors per room to advanced technologies. So let's shift and actually look at the patient room quickly. At Penn, we name everything. We name this patient room technology Iris, which is sort of the eye or the view for the patient. On the upper right-hand side, you'll see what is sort of the keystone of the patient room at the foot wall, which is a 75-inch monitor. In this particular configuration, you can see the person's watching HGTV. Below there, you've got the weather, the temperature, and things like that. And then off on the right, maybe the most interesting piece of this from my perspective was a digital whiteboard. So in the old days, you had, we had anyway, a dry erase board where a provider would put their name and maybe what they were doing. In this particular case, this digital whiteboard off on the right has all the care team members, has their pictures, has their names and what their role is. It has basic patient information, goals, plans for the day, so that if the patient is asleep when the doctor does the rounds, they wake up, they can share this information with their family and they know what's going on. So a real move ahead for us. We've integrated all these technologies into the pillow speaker. So not only can you do things like nurse call, which is something that would normally be done there, but you can curate the room and make the patient feel as comfortable as possible. So you can control the shades for the outside walls. You can control the lighting, dim as you'd like it to be. You can control the temperature to your own personal setting. There's privacy glass on the hallway side of things that you can flip on and off if you desire. And then lastly, the curation of the on-demand entertainment center that sits again at that foot wall with this 75-inch monitor. The ability to take a person's iPhone and ultimately plug that in and share some of their own entertainment capabilities there in the room to, again, make them feel more comfortable. Below that, the pictures are awfully small, but this sort of shows the technology that goes on behind the scenes. Below the screen itself is a panel that pulls off, a wood panel. All of our technology is tucked back in there safely and securely. We've integrated PenChart, which is our EHR, the nurse call system, Caregility, which is a camera and a set of speakers in the room that allows us to not only do teleconsults, but also communicate with other caregivers as necessary. CenTrack is the technology that when a provider walks through the door, they carry a badge, and that's what demonstrates or shows the picture and their name on the screen, so it's dynamic. Lawson, of course, and we've tried to do some things with alarms to reduce alarm fatigue with our clinical staff. You might be able to see one of those pictures. We put a small, switch down there where all the network cabling is tied up nicely. At the very last minute, we decided to pull some additional cables to the room with the thinking that in the next 3 to 5 years, they would need more cabling. And we didn't want to bring ICRA panels in and be very invasive. Well, it took about 3 weeks before we got our first request to add some additional technology to the room. We had the cabling there and we looked pretty darn smart. So that's our patient room technology. When you're doing a project this long, so it was about a 7-year project, there's all kinds of things that change, right, in the world during that time. So we had to do a bunch of what I like to think of as innovation on the fly. So the first one was around offsite prefabrication. And the example I use here is the brand new patient bathrooms that go into this amazing patient room. So in a normal scenario, you'd have all your trades come in there and work in, and you'd have to sequence things, and you'd have to worry about supplies getting there on time. We completely prefabricated these bathroom units, if you will, offsite, saved money, was more environmentally friendly, and then we carried these in, brought them up with cranes, and delivered them into the patient rooms. So a real win for us doing things with a prefabricated approach. We had never done advanced technology deployment at scale, so we stole the same type of prefabricated approach. So we built out these boxes, and each box had documentation and it was tied to a closet. And then off-site, we did all of our cable work, pre-cut the cable lengths, pre-labeled the cables, put the gear that was needed for that particular closet. We would just roll these boxes up, and it allowed us to use very junior technicians to sort of plug and play. They'd pull the cover off the box, they'd put the switch in, they'd put the cabling in, and it was very effective for us to do something like that at scale versus the traditional way we would have done it. We are one of 4 organizations in the country today that has a 2-story emergency department. So I could spend an hour talking about that, but basically it was designed around efficiency and the desire of that department to be able to greenfield design what they wanted to do. A significant amount of technologies went into our interventional or OR spaces. The one that jumps out at me is the video infrastructure that we put in. So we're able to do on the fly continuing medical education. We're allowed to do on the fly provider collaboration during procedures. So we've done some pretty spectacular things from an OR perspective. We integrated fully the elevators and building automation, which was the first time for us. It allowed us to make sure that these things were being managed securely. We had hubs where we could manage them appropriately in terms of upgrades and making sure that they were working properly. We wanted to make sure that we had enterprise-wide comprehensive communication. So that means if the physician's on the phone, it works in the elevator, it works in the basement, it works in the parking garages. And we've installed these ruggedized APs around the exterior of the building in a secure manner so that even if a physician or a provider steps outside and wants to continue a conversation, they're able to do that with our facilities. And then lastly is we've designed the patient room such that any room of the 504 could quickly be converted to an ICU room. So that flexibility, particularly in the light of the global pandemic that we're living through, has been really important for us. So that agility around patient room design has really been a game changer for us. So let's look a little bit at Go Live. I'll share with you some of what I think of as the lessons learned. One is around staffing. We had probably 200 IT people working on this project, 40-some project managers over the course of the project. When we went live, we do a shoulder-to-shoulder support approach. So we had dozens of people on every floor, making sure that the technologies were working, making sure if the patients or the providers had questions, we were able to support them on the fly. And we were able to shut that operation down pretty quickly, but having that day one was a big game changer for us. And then the last thing I would say from a staffing perspective is we work very closely with our clinical operations teams. And it's never an IT project or an IT initiative. It's always something we work very closely with our operational peers with, and that's also incredibly effective for us. As some of the previous speakers have talked about COVID, we found times where we needed to surge for COVID, and this building gave us a little bit of flexibility. We had some administrative space that was carved out for office space for key providers. And a couple of times we actually set that space up as we thought the spikes were going to happen again. Ultimately didn't use that space, but the ability to scale and be flexible was really important to us as an organization. During a long project like this, you always get requests for newer technologies. So we started to say at some point in the project, look, we're freezing our technology because we want it to work day one, but we'll have phase 2 technology improvements. Some of the things that jump out at me from a patient room, one is using a voice control, like an approach to actually use voice versus using the pillow speaker. Two would be the ability to put clinical images up on that 75-inch screen as appropriate to share things with patients and their families. But a whole list of these improvements that need to be installed now. We learned that greenfield really allows you to do things right. We had been doing things pretty well for a long time, but we challenged ourselves and said, let's not just do it the way we used to do it. Let's step back and say, is there a better way to do this? And I'd encourage you, as you're working on greenfield projects, to take that approach. We were incredibly transparent with our status reporting. We did a ton of technical dress rehearsals, did a bunch of go live readiness, and we provided a bunch of dashboards that had yellow and red. We took a very brutal fact approach. Sometimes it was painful, but it really allowed us to be honest. It allowed us to reallocate resources appropriately and make sure that we could drive through some of the problems. It's funny, a couple of the buildings I've been involved in, it always seems to be the elevators and physical security that are challenges day one. We probably over-engineered both. We tied our elevators to ID cards, digital ID cards. So if you worked on the fourth floor, you would wave it, it would know to take you to the fourth floor. We backed off on that a little bit. We think we did over-engineer. From a physical security standpoint, we did a bunch of Wi-Fi locks and getting that right day one with who needs access to what. Again, I think we probably should have stepped back a little bit on those, but a lesson learned. For us, decision-making throughout the process was absolutely key. We are a governance or a consensus-driven organization. It goes back to our Quaker roots, and it's really built into our DNA. Sometimes it takes longer to get to a decision, but once you have a decision and once you have consensus, you're able to march forward pretty quickly. So that was key, the governance process to our decision-making. And then once you build a building of this scale or this magnitude, you've got to prepare for the worst case. So you don't have to read the newspaper too deeply to figure out there's some ransomware event almost on a daily basis, and many of them with healthcare organizations. So how do you build this facility preparing for ransomware, building the right level of security, cybersecurity protections into the environment? And how do you work with your operational folks to have the right business continuity and disaster recovery components in place such that if you have a disaster, you're able to enable that pretty quickly? And then the last thing for me is, as you get to the end of this project, we had set this date years in advance. And as we were driving towards it, we got to within a couple of weeks. There were probably 100 things that were, still to be done. And we looked at ourselves and said, do we extend for another 2 weeks, or do we just push through and make it happen? And I really feel had we extended, we would have still had 100 issues to resolve. So, my advice after living through this is when you're close, if there's nothing major, drive through, trust your people to do the right thing on the fly, and then tweak those last minute minor things as you go live versus continuing to push your date out. We set out at the beginning to do what I'll call a future-proof building. We learned along the way that that was probably a bridge too far. And we have settled on building a building that's future ready. And that's where we think we're at. So hopefully there's some stuff in here that's helpful to folks as they're looking at projects like this. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you so much, John. That was really great. And I believe Dr. Finkler is back with us. And I know he was getting very close to concluding. Dr. Finkler, are you with us? I think we're still having technical problems. So what we'll do, and we so appreciate that Dr. Finkler was able to give us 90% of his presentation. Let me bring, if Dr. Satpathy, if you could return visually and orally.
Yes.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Again, I apologize for a technical problem there. This is live on Zoom. Someone will have to write a book about that. At least no one's cat walked across their screen so far.
Not done yet.
Not yet. Yes, exactly. So I think what I'd like to have us do for the few minutes we have remaining, Dr. Satpathy and John Donahue, I know you saw Dr. Finkler before he was excommunicated there. If you could just both share with us from everyone else's presentations, what do you think the commonalities are here that people are learning about how to really intelligently and in a kind of laser-like way leverage technology? All three of you gave great presentations, and all three of you, it seems to me, it was very obvious you zeroed in on certain aspects. You didn't try to boil the ocean. Is that right, Dr. Satpathy, that that's one of the things that you learned?
Yes, thanks for that. Yeah, I think that not doing everything is actually really important so that you can do a few things well. I do think we are in kind of a historically disruptive change moment. And so many of us really identify that, change across many types of culture, environment, technology, disruption is a fantastic path that opens opportunity. And so COVID-19 has actually been a great disruptor of healthcare in some ways that can really accelerate change. And we see that both with, I think, national, state, and local, leaning in to help us make that change. So now's the time. If you had the dream to make a change in your organization, accelerate it. It's not the time to sort of, I think, sit back on the chair. But as you state, you probably shouldn't try to do everything. Try to do a few things very well. And I think learn from what's been going on in business. I think I was really impressed by John Donahoe, who is talking about, relooking also just at your basic infrastructure, tidying that up and making it sturdy. And I was talking also about, patients. They have all these digital devices at home. You're not even integrating them and bringing them, closer into the healthcare ecosystem. So thank you.
Absolutely. And John, as you were listening to Dr. Satpathy and Dr. Finkler, what thoughts came across your mind, especially the commonality for what you've done at Penn Medicine?
Yeah, it was fascinating. There's a topic that they both talked about that had I had more time, I would have addressed. So it's a common theme across all organizations, and that's the people. So I think we're at a time right now where you read the Great Resignation, and we certainly feel some of that pain, not only in IT, but with some of our clinical technologists. And as you open a building like this, you have 500 or 600 new jobs, and you're challenged to sort of retain the staff you have. Never mind go out and fight for all these new people at the quality that you're looking for, right? And I heard both Amy, talk about that along with Neil is, the importance of having good people who can stay along with the technology and not just do what used to be done. But, Amy talked about the disruptions. Like, you have to have pretty agile people who can kind of come into work. They're dealing with COVID. They're dealing with all the stressors associated with that. Now you're introducing disruptive technologies. If you have good people, you can wrestle through that. But that's to me a common theme is the really strong people you have on your team and managing through with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Is it possible? Is Dr. Finkler back? Is he here? I keep seeing his name. I guess not. Well, I feel bad about that. Anyway, I will say the thing that really struck me about all three of your presentations, I'll use a simple word. You were also smart, right? Like in each case, Dr. Finkler, Dr. Satpathy, John Donahoe, each one of you, and your whole teams, obviously it wasn't one person creating these massive changes. It's what I call the bread box issue, right? You want, or the Goldilocks question, you want it to be just the right level and size and scope, right? And I know I've talked to Dr. Satpathy about that in the past too, right? The worst thing is to get too diffuse, right? And try to do so many things that you're kind of chasing your tail. And then people get very discouraged by that, right? That it's like, oh my gosh, we tried to climb Mount Everest and we can barely walk across the gym. And so what strikes me about all of your innovations is the focus and the scope. You all bit off the right amount that you could chew. You made, I loved Dr. Finkler's, one of the things I loved about the MissionControl was how they focused very much on very specific things, very specific elements that were kind of clinical operational, right? Like, how did they make sure that bed capacity was being managed well. And then, of course, they did this all before COVID, and COVID hit, and they had the infrastructure to manage bed capacity and staffing management under COVID. And Dr. Satpathy, one of the things that I love about your example is how it was very step by step, right? Like you decided what you could do, what made sense to do from a population health and care management standpoint, and then you figured out what the technology was that was useful, rather than just like throwing everything at it. Am I right?
Mark, this is Neil. I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Dr. Finkler, welcome back. We're so
Thank
sorry.
you. I apologize. We've had a major network outage here, and I can hear you, but I wasn't able to get unmute or undo anything.
Okay.
So I'm using Venus's cell phone. So I appreciate getting back.
Oh,
I think your point is really well taken. I think we were very specific with regards to narrow your focus. I think one of the other things, it's certainly the charge I gave my CMOs, and that is when you're thinking differently and you're looking to innovate, it's actually okay to fail. Keep your scope narrow. You know, clinicians never like to hear the F word. It's called failure. And you know, failure is such an important step with regards to innovation and transformation that you've got to give your teams the latitude to understand that they can fail as long as we learn from the fail. I tell them fail fast, fail hard, and let's learn and move on. But you got to keep it focused as well. And I think it's a great point.
I think that's exactly right, Dr. Finkler. And one of the things that I have to say that I see as common in all these organizations, whether it's Advent Health, UCSD Health, Penn Medicine, all of your organizations, every organization that is being innovative, I see people like yourself, Dr. Satpathy and John Donahue, who are willing to take risks, because I think this is no longer your grandfather's healthcare system, right? You have to do well. You have to move forward. You can't just be custodial and say, well, what we did in 1975 is good enough, right? Like that's not the answer. And do you want to, Dr. Satpathy, talk about culture for 1 minute?
Yeah, I think the other thing we're all saying, Neil, John, and myself, is really culture is everything. So each of us presenting today talked about this, but all of you who are joining to listen in as well, understand the value of culture and being the change, letting it be palpable, this cultural commitment to evolve. And I think having a place of really wellness and balance for our patients and community and staff, and really feeling that is very different than thinking through it. So this helps bring the organization along with you.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And the other thing is the leadership that you're all showing, right? In every innovative organization that I and my team have interviewed, there are people who are willing to expend some personal professional capital, right? And say, okay, if I flop in a certain way, so be it. We're going to keep moving, and then we'll figure things out. And I see that in all three of you. I see it in your teams based on everything you shared with us today. We literally have 1 minute left. So I think I think I'll just summarize for us, because there's not quite enough time to. What I'm hearing from all of you is make your moves now, exploit this time of disruption. I agree 1,000,000,000% on that. And the way I interpret it is expend your own personal professional capital to get things done. All of you are leaders. One can see that. And you have leaders on your team. And that's how things get done. But I think if there's a single thing, and Dr. Finkler, you referred to it in your presentation, this is a moment where, look, our whole world has been disrupted. Literally, the entire world has been disrupted by the pandemic. And if there's a single silver lining in that, it's okay. The way that we did things before, just kind of won't work anyway. Let's just figure out new things and new ways to do things. And that to me is what is most exciting about healthcare in 2022 in this country. Tons of risk, lots of issues, lots of challenges. Oh my gosh. But with leaders like yourselves in position, I know we're going to continue to innovate. So we've run out of time, but Dr. Finkler, Dr. Satpathy, John Donahue, thank you so much. And thank you to all of you in our audience for being patient with some of our technical glitches. The Zoom demons could not defeat us. And Matt Rayner has returned to conclude, but I'm going to say thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mark, and thank you, panelists. What a great way to kick off our February Digital Health virtual events. As I mentioned at the beginning of this session, we have a number of fireside chats available now to watch on demand. And during this short break, I encourage you all to check out a few of them. We will resume with our next live session at 12 o'clock Eastern Time, and that will be a discussion on enterprise telehealth across the care continuum. So we will see you back here live at 12 o'clock Eastern Time. Until then, thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.